Hi everybody, and a happy new year to you all. Let's hope 2021 is better than 2020 and that we all get vaccinated as soon as possible and let life return to normal, or more normal should I say. Well, welcome to another Route 7 Railway Workbench Session, and what we're going to do today is we're going to try and save this. This is a HO locomotive. It's a Roco model, a Deutsche Bahn 112504, and when I got it, it was faulty. It was a noisy runner, but since then it's give up the ghost. The drive basically seized up. I took the liberty in partly stripping this, and I found out the fault. The fault was in the motor, and it was at one end. There's a brass bearing at either end of the drive shaft on the armature, and one of the plastic mounts for each one of those bearings had actually collapsed. And what I'm going to do is keep the original motor until I can get in it. Maybe one day get a new part, but the original motors on these, you're talking £40 second hand, and I didn't pay that for the loco. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to replace the motor that's in it with a Chinese motor as a trial, and let's see if it works. If you take the top off this, just put that out the way. I've already unscrewed this panel, and in doing so a wire's come off, so I can test it anyway, but that's an easy solder job when we're putting it all back together. This all lifts off and it's connected to the bogies front and rear, and they just literally pull off because they're on like a fork there that pushes over that. So if I do the other side, and what's normally between these drives are these little drive springs, and they take up any misalignment and shift in the motor, which makes my job easier for when I'm putting the other motor back in. So if I just get that off there and move all the brains out of the way for now. Now, here's the chassis and there's the motor. You can only put it in one way because the flywheel obviously goes where that square is, that fixed square there, and it's only a push fit. So the motor comes out, I can put that to one side and that's the motor. If I use this as a pointer, it was actually on this end, which I think is the weight of the flywheel causes pressure on that bearing there. Just inside there's a small brass bearing, and it's held in by little plastic teeth on this white part here. So if you imagine the small brass bearing sits in there like that, sits in it like that, and what had happened is half of these teeth had broken, so that when it was running, this end was floating like that, so the shaft was binding on other things and causing the racket. Couldn't fix it. Not going to buy a new one because of the 40 odd quid and ridiculous amount of money. So I'm going to replace it with this. Obviously it's a twin shaft motor, and as you can see straight away there's size differences, but these can all be sorted out. You're talking 0.4 of a mil difference in that dimension there. Now what I've found is that if you pull the flywheel off, which is easy to do, pull the drive shaft there off, they're the contact terminals to run the motor, and obviously there's your twin shaft. What I've found, if you look here, all the connections on this motor at the right end, and if I just put that on top there, the important thing is that these two shafts are at the exact same length, so that's great. So what I can do when it goes in, I can put them on. The shafts are 2mm as well, thick diameter, so it fits. So there we go. I've tested this motor, it runs really quietly and smoothly, lovely. So that the dimensions are right lengthwise for fitting back in there. The original motor was a push fit on these like rubber mountings here. What I'm going to do is, once I've modified the contacts here to replace these, I'm going to solder wires onto these to run out, and I'll show you where they connect later on. All I've got to do now is centralize this. Now, I've got to centralize it there and there, and I've got to centralize it there and along here. If I just hold that with my finger, the flywheel sits in the middle of this space. It's a bit cockeyed at the moment, and what I've got to do is I've got to put a shim underneath the motor to lift it that 1/2 mil, maybe 1/4 mil, so that this flywheel does not foul on the chassis there. And once I can do that, that'll be fine. So I've got to lift it very slightly, let's say 1/4 mil, it's got to be lifted up. And what I will do is, once the wires are on here, I'll centralize it, and I'm going to use my hot glue gun either side there, because the hot glue, when it dries, is slightly rubbery. I'm going to use it to take the place of these white rubber mountings to give it the to hold the vibrations, and then that will fit into there like so. So there's no point in me showing you the next bit. What I'll do is I'll take this away and I'll sort these terminals out and solder wires onto those terminals, and I'll give you a look at that, and then we'll shimmer this up and start thinking about putting it in the chassis. I'll get back to you in a minute. Bye. I'm back again. Right, what I've done, I've trimmed those terminals on that motor and just soldered a couple of wires to it, and that's going to enable me to connect that up. I've also done the repair on the circuit board. I've soldered the two connections back together there. So we're all ready to go on that part of it anyway. Once I've fitted that motor into the chassis, like so, I've then got to adapt the ends of these wires to work on these two terminals here. They originally just spring fitted around that like so, to touch onto those terminals, but I'm going to hardwire it in. Those solder repairs are done. That modification's been done to that motor. Now it's get it all in there, get the motor centralized in there. So I'll get back to you when that's done. Okay, and welcome back. Right, you can see what I've done here. I've spaced the motor so that the flywheel is right in the middle of that square. It's about 1 mil off, touching the frame, which is right. And I've four cornered the motor at the hot glued in 4 corners at the bottom, and I've hot glued across the top. So the actual rubbery hot glue is acting like an engine mounting, so it avoids gets rid of the vibration. So what I'll do now, I'll put some power into the motor and we'll get an idea. Now you've got to remember that this originally was like the noisiest train in the universe, and eventually packed in. Let's see what happens. Now, I am absolutely made up with that. and the flywheel is doing its job, I put that on full power and then turn it right off, and it keeps going and slows down itself. Lovely. Now what I've got to do now is think up a way of connecting these two wires to those two terminals there. I'm trying to think whether I should try and retain them, you see. Try and retain these two terminals for as and when one day I might want to revert this back to the original motor, so that those two terminals will still work with those posts. I could back them through there like that, keep them long, and bring them back and go onto the terminal like so. Yeah, I think I'll do that. Back them up, double them over like so, and they'll go onto those two terminals, and I'll see if I can just put them on midway so I don't affect everything. Yep, so that's what I'm going to do. I'll get on with that and I'll get back to you. What I've done, I've soldered those two wires onto those two terminals there. So what I'm going to do now is put this back together and test it. It's quite scary, isn't it? So I'll get back to you in a sec once I've put that back together. Hi, back again. So what we can see, what I've done here, I've screwed down the top plate. These are the extension wires that I fitted before, and I can tuck them away into there when I put the body on. There's the original wires. They'll tidy up. I'll just show you. If you just see there, there's like a barrel-shaped spring. It connects to that shaft there, which goes to the drive wheels, connects to the motor, and the same on the other side. And any discrepancy, as you can see, when they turn up, down, or whatever, it allows for that. A bit like a universal joint, but it's actually a spring. So that's taking out any misalignment. I tested the motor in the chassis, as you heard, and it's all very quiet. So what I plan to do now, I've connected the bogies up. It's all back in place. I put some power into this track. And let's just see what happens here. The original, you couldn't hear yourself think when it was running. It just made that much of a racket. So let's just see what happens. Oh wow, that is quiet. That's great. So what I'm going to do now is stow the wires and put the body shell on. This is the way around. There we go. Clicked in. Let's get some power into the rolling road. We've now got fully functional and quiet HO locomotive. Now what I would usually say in this situation is result. So I'm really pleased with that. And the next time you'll see this, I'll put it on the track on the layout. Excellent job, made up. Speak to you later. I'm back at the train room and the layout. We're just going to do a little test run of our repair and the motor swap. So I'll just get that going. I hope you like my makeshift door handle. The old one broke and I've got to replace it. Now that's going okay, I think. That's not too bad at all, is it? Considering it was a non-runner and the noisiest runner in the universe. Very nice. One thing I will need to replace with this is the traction tyres. There's 2 traction tyres on it and they are quite worn, so I'll look into that next. I think that shows that the experiment at swapping that motor over has been a success. So, on to the next project.